We are in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Second Corinthians chapter 8. Paul has been reminding the brethren in Corinth about a specific instruction that he gave them in the first letter, and what was that? That's right, the collection. They were to give. We read that instruction in 1 Corinthians chapter 16. He instructed them on the first day of the week. They were to give as they've been prospered. And this giving, he was specifically talking about a specific need. What was that need? The saints in Jerusalem were they were struggling, and they had a great need, and various churches from around the area were taking up a collection, and Paul is instructing the church in Corinth to participate in that. And at the beginning of chapter 8, he used a certain group for an example to the Corinthians. Who was that? The Macedonians. That's right. He used the Macedonians, who he describes as being in great poverty, but they had given beyond their means, more than they're capable of giving. They dug deep and gave it, and using them as a great example for the Corinthians. And we noted how the financial situation for the Corinthians would have been very different than the Macedonians, because the Macedonians were in great poverty, but still were able to give. But the Corinthians, as a general rule, people in Corinth were not struggling so much. Corinth was known for its wealth. So Paul's challenging the Corinthians to look at the example of the poor Macedonians who gave, and you follow their example in that. We were on about verse 12 when we left off last week. Let's begin reading at verse 12, and then we'll go down. We'll just read to the end of the chapter and see if we can get that far. 2 Corinthians 8, beginning at verse 12. For if there be first a willing mind, it is accepted according to that a man hath, and not according to that he hath not. For I mean not that other men be eased and ye be burdened, but by an equality, that now at this time your abundance may be a supply for their want, that their abundance may also be a supply for your want, that there may be equality. As it is written, he that had gathered much had nothing over, and he that had gathered little had no lack. But thanks be to God, which put the same earnest care into the heart of Titus for you. For indeed he accepted the exhortation, but being more forward, of his own accord he went unto you. And we have sent with him the brother, whose praise is in the gospel throughout all the churches. And not only that, but who was also chosen of the churches to travel with us with this grace, which is administered by us to the glory of the same Lord, and declaration of your ready mind. Avoiding this, that no man should blame us in the abundance which is administered by us, providing for honest things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. And we have sent with them our brother, whom we have oftentimes proved diligent in many things, but now much more diligent upon the great confidence which I have in you. Whether any do inquire of Titus, he is my partner and fellow helper concerning you, or our brethren be inquired of, they are the messengers of the churches and the glory of Christ. Wherefore show ye to them and before the churches the proof of your love and of our boasting on your behalf. All right, we'll pause there and go back and begin at verse 12. He says, for if there first be a willing mind. So he doesn't want to have to pull this contribution out of them. He wants them to go into this giving with a willing mind, with a readiness, with an eagerness to give. And I think the last thing that we mentioned last week was was a comparison. I noted that wasn't about the amount that was given. It was about the mind, the attitude toward the giving. Because we noted, I think it was Brother Billy that brought up the poor widow last week from Mark 12 verses 41 to 44. How much did she give? She gave everything, but what was the actual amount? Too much. I mean, that was a very small amount, but it was what she had. And that shows her mindset toward that giving, to what she was willing to give everything that she had to the Lord for His work and so forth. But then I noted a great contrast. This poor widow was praised, even though the amount that she gave was very, very small. She was praised in what she gave because of the mind. She was willing to give what she had. But then I think I briefly noted another example of one who was praised and giving a great amount. You remember the precious ointment that was used to anoint the Lord in Mark 14 and verse 3. In fact, it was argued that could have been sold for a very large amount of money. But it was used for the Lord. So it's not about the amount. Now, if we have a great amount, we should be able to be willing to give that. If we don't have a very large amount of money, we should be willing to give from what we have. It's the mindset that goes in to the giving. If there be a willing mind, that's verse 12 still. For if there first be a willing mind, it is accepted according to that a man hath, not according to what he doesn't have. In other words, sometimes we focus on, well, I can't give much. Well, okay, well, give what you have. Give what you're able to give. It's not the amount. It's what the mind that we have toward the giving. Give what we're able to give. Again, if we have a great amount, we'll give. Questions, comments? That's true too. That's true too. Absolutely. We can give time. We can give effort. Now, that doesn't relieve us of the responsibility to give monetarily. We have that instruction, but you're absolutely right. We need to be willing to give our time and effort in the Lord's cause as well. Great point. What other questions, comments? But he's about to. Yeah. In many ways. Of course, there's always a need there for, the Great Commission needs to be carried out, and I've always thought that the United States of America has a greater responsibility to the Great Commission than anybody else does. Why? Why would I say that? Because we have the resources and opportunities to do it more than anybody else does. So we need, just like it's according to what you have, not according to what you have not. Well, we have the resources and opportunities more than anybody else on this earth. So we're going to give account for how we use those. With that mindset, I think the church here has a greater responsibility than anybody else does toward the Great Commission to get the gospel into the whole world. But to Jim's point, when we see the sin that is being promoted, yes, in this country, but also around the world, it emphasizes the need for that even more, to get the truth out there. Great point. It's a great point. When we have a mind centered on self, we don't give so much, do we? Whether that's talking about money or time or resources, What are the questions, comments? Verse 13. For I mean not that other men be eased and ye be burdened. Paul's not saying, well, you need to impoverish yourself so that someone else can be benefited. No, that's not what he's saying. And in fact, he'll go further with that in verse 14. But he's not asking them to to give everything that they have so that they can't feed themselves anymore. That's not what he's asking. And he goes into further on that in verse 14. But by an equality. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, he gives us an idea that now, at this time, your abundance may be a supply for their want, but then he gives the other side of it. That their abundance may also be a supply for your want, that there may be an equality. So it goes for both sides. Now, this equality concept, I think you can look at it from different perspectives, and I think both have an application to it. Right now, it's the brethren in Judea that have a great need. But that may not always be the case. At some point down the road, it might be the Corinthians who are in great need, and the brethren in Judea are collecting to help them. So there's an equality in that. Right now it's them, it might be you that have a need. But also you can look at it from a different perspective as well, and in that the Corinthians they're giving financially, but they're also gaining, I think, some spiritual blessings in the process of that. So there's an equality in that. They're receiving spiritual blessings. Great point as well. If they hold back, then they're not receiving those same blessings that they would. It's a great point. So, as I said, I think the equality Paul's talking about may have multiple meanings, and they all have application here. Questions, comments?
Talked about the very poor giving. Another more modern example of someone on the opposite side who was very rich, or became very rich. I never knew him. I think he probably was after long before I was born. But it was A.M. Burton. Burton, casualty in life out of Nashville, Tennessee. Had an insurance agency. Large, it grew large. He was a faithful Christian, and he purposed to try to give it away. He said, and I've learned I can't outgive the Lord. He said, every time I start trying to give more, he said the business just keeps prospering through the providence of God. But he fully financed Marshall Keith and others in order to take the gospel to all the world. He said it was his goal that when he died, that he would have nothing. He wanted to give it all away before he died.
That's a mindset toward giving. Yeah, absolutely.
According to one man hath, and not what he does not have. Anyway, so again, are them that are rich in this world, that be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but God to give us richly all things to enjoy.
Absolutely.
So again, it's according to what a man has.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the poor widow, according to Jesus, gave as much as Brother Burton did.
Mm-hmm.
All up.
Exactly. Was he the one that was quoted? Because he kept trying to give more and more, and he said, God's got a bigger shovel than I do. I think he was the one that was quoted saying something like that. So, yeah, absolutely.
How you give, so it's not again to be seen by man. So it's not to go around bragging about how much you give, because again, give a lot, but then hold back on those other things that the church needs, whether it's
true.
Helping others or helping Bible class, VBS, whatever. Because again, their mindset is, well, I already gave money.
Right. That we don't want to say negate the responsibility to give financially, but also that doesn't relieve our responsibilities to be a part of the work in a personal way and be active. Great point. Verse 15, as it is written, he that had gathered much had nothing over, and he that had gathered little had no lack. And of course, he says, as it is written, this is an Old Testament quote. Where's it from? What's the context? You might get an idea of the context just by those words without. That's right, from the gathering of the manna. Go back to Exodus 16, verses 16 to 18. That's where this quote is taken, the gathering of the manna, as God was taking care of the Israelites while they were in the wilderness. Now, why would Paul reference that in this conversation or this instruction concerning giving? Why would he reference the gathering of the manna? Right. I wonder if the Corinthians were concerned, well, if I give, I'm going to be lacking. I won't have enough to take care of myself and my own family. And so what if my own needs aren't able to be met? I wonder if the Corinthians were expressing concerns about that or had that kind of mindset. Or I don't know, but it would fit why Paul would bring this up. Because if we know that God could take care of the Israelites in the wilderness, well, can he take care of the Corinthians? Absolutely, he could. And that applies to us as well. That's right. Absolutely. Uh, that's right. Trying to gather too much. Now, on the sixth day, they could gather an extra, but any other day they tried to gather extra. What happened? Yeah. There was, it was a way to express their trust in the Lord. God's going to provide tomorrow too, so they don't have to gather for more than one day. But also reminds me of Matthew 6, and that's what Bren was referring to as well. Verses 19 to 34. Seek first the kingdom of God, and what? And His righteousness. He'll take care of you. God will provide. Now, does that mean He's going to give us every want that we have and make us well? No, that's not what that means. But He's able to care for His people. And in the context, that caring, sometimes we talk about God caring for us spiritually and the spiritual blessing. Absolutely, that's true. But in the context of Matthew 6, what kind of blessings is that? That's our physical needs being specifically described in Matthew 6. So Paul brings this up. God's able to take care of the Israelites in the wilderness. He can take care of you. Give. Fulfill the promise that you made to give and help the poor saints in Jerusalem, in Judea. And that's an example, isn't it? Of God will take care of us. 16, verse 16. But thanks be to God, which put the same earnest care into the heart of Titus. So now he brings up Titus as well. Paul's thankful to the Lord. He's thankful to God. Not only does he care for the church in Corinth, but so does Titus. Titus cared for the Corinthians just as Paul did. And Paul, we know that he had a very close bond, close relationship. He saw them as his children in the faith. And he says, Titus cares for you just as I do. And remember, Paul had sent Titus. It's evident that he sent that first letter to Corinth with Titus. And now Titus had brought back that good report. They responded positively to the corrections that needed to be made. And Paul's expressing to them now, Titus cares for you the way I do. He's part of the instruction and encouragement that he's giving to the brethren in Corinth. 17, for indeed he accepted the exhortation, but being more forward of his own accord, he went up unto you. The exhortation. Paul exhorted Titus, but Titus had to be willing to go on his own. He wasn't going just because Paul was making him, but he was willing to go and more diligent. find the word here. Being more full. Again, I think we mentioned this word. Paul used it more than once last week. But being more forward. What does he mean when he says that? We don't use that term in that way very much anymore. Showing an earnest desire. Diligence. Exactly. He was eager. He was determined to go and carry out what Paul wanted him to do and help the church in Corinth. Paul could have come. Paul's an apostle. He could have commanded Titus, you go do this, but he didn't have to because Titus was willing to go and do this. Verses 18 and following, the thought just kind of continues on through. And we have sent with him the brother whose praise is in the gospel throughout all the churches. And we'll go ahead and get the next couple as well. And not only that, but who was also chosen of the churches to travel with us with this grace, which is administered by us to the glory of the same Lord and declaration of your ready mind, avoiding this, that no man should blame us in this abundance which is administered by us. All right, we'll stop there. So he makes reference to this brother. Who is this brother? Well, we don't know specifically. But he tells us something about him. And what is that? Okay, he's well known, isn't he? And he's well respected throughout all the churches. Praise is known throughout all the churches. And who chose this man for this task? Was it Paul himself? No, it wasn't. The churches chose him. Now that's significant because what's Paul doing here? The task here and what Paul's talking about is he's taking up a collection. And if you put a large sum of money into one person's hand with nobody else knowing what's going on, what might happen? It may not get to where it's supposed to go, and even if it does, there might be some suspicion about whether that was the total amount and what he might have done and that sort of thing. So Paul's not going to take this by himself. He's using some wisdom in this. And in fact, the one who's going with him is not somebody that he handpicked, but this person's been picked by these churches. So no accusation. No legitimate accusation could be made against Paul in this. Paul's not trying to be deceptive, and he's not choosing somebody to help him who might team up with him. Y'all conspired together. No, this is somebody the churches chose to go with him, that they respect, that they know, and so forth. Questions, comments? Absolutely. And that is a lesson for us, isn't it? Practice wisdom with this. Now, I will mention, I said we don't know who this person was, and we don't, but I think it's just interesting that some have suggested they think this was Luke. And why would someone say that? Well, we know that Luke was with Paul when he was in Macedonia. We reference Acts 16, verses 10 and 11, also verse 15. Luke's name is not mentioned there. However, who wrote the book of Acts? Luke, and you notice the terminology. He says we and us. So that Luke was with Paul at that time. So some have suggested, well, maybe this man that they chose to go with Paul must have been Luke. That's why Luke's there. Maybe, but I can't say that with any certainty at all. Could just as well have been another person that is just not named for us. Questions, comments? Whoever this was, it was a man of a good reputation among the churches, someone that they trusted, and that the churches chose, not Paul, to go with him. But Paul's not going to do it by himself. He's not going to carry this contribution by himself. He's preventing accusations being formed against him. Certainly, that's a great point as well. I mean, if this wasn't a secret, now the brethren knew, I mean, various churches and brethren knew, it might have been possible for that to get out, that Paul's carrying a large amount of money, and that could put him in danger. It's a great point. Looking one more thing in verse 20, avoiding this, that no man should blame us in the abundance which was ministered to us. So that tells us again, this is a large amount of money, this abundance. Some translations have, instead of in the place of the word abundance, some say this lavish gift that's been administered to him and carried by Paul and those with him for the brethren in Judea. Questions, comments? Providing for honest things, okay? That's why Paul's doing this. He's not by himself. He's got other people with him, specifically someone chosen by the churches to go with him. Providing for honest things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. Of course, that reminds me also of Romans 12:17. What does that text say? Romans 12:17. Exactly. Very similar concept going on. There's multiple applications for that, but certainly this is one. And it seems when money is involved, that's where accusations are very common. So provide things honest. Don't, even though you may not intend to be deceptive, be overly open. Provide things honest. And Paul's protecting his reputation. In his reputation of honesty and integrity by doing it this way. And we have sent with them, verse 22, we have sent with them our brother, whom we have oftentimes proved diligent in many things, but now much more diligent upon the great confidence which I have in you. Now we have a second brother who is not named. He's sent by Paul. The first, sent and chosen by the churches. This one, still unnamed, also sent by Paul. But he had proved himself to be trustworthy. And verse 22 in the King James uses the word proved diligent, earnest. He's a hard worker and committed in many things. And now, concerning this confidence which Paul has in them as well. Again, don't know who this brother is. We have another unnamed brother. But he's with Paul, and he's shown himself to be trustworthy. Has a great reputation. That's a good point as well. Maybe they're not named for their own safety and for the safety of the group. Verse 23, whether any do inquire of Titus, he is my partner and fellow helper. All right, so he mentioned Titus earlier, how Titus loves the brethren in Corinth just as Paul loves the brethren. Now he brings up Titus again. If there's any question about Titus, Paul says he's, what does he call him? My partner and what? Fellow helper. That shows great trust that Paul has in Titus, great confidence. He's my partner, he's my fellow helper. He's my right-hand man, so to speak, in the work that we're doing and carrying out this work, this mission with Corinth. And of course, the brethren in Corinth would have been very, very familiar with Titus as well. Titus had been there. Paul had sent him already. And he's still with him. Last verse of the chapter here, verse 24. Wherefore show ye to them and before the churches the proof of your love and of your boasting on your behalf. Paul's describing, we've gone to great extent to provide things honest. We're not doing anything deceptive. We're not trying to cheat anybody. We're not trying to take anything for ourselves. Everything is being in an honest way. There's no reason for you to hold back. There's no reason for you to neglect the promise that you made. You made a promise that you're going to help these Christians that are in need in Judea. Follow through with your promise. The proof of your love. Show to them, before the churches that are, these other churches that are represented as well, show the proof of your love. Show that you love the brethren. I've been boasting. I've been, telling people about this promise that you made. Make good on it. Questions, comments? A few noteworthy points from chapter 8. And of course, some of these thoughts will continue right into chapter 9 as well, as we're on the same subject as we go into chapter 9. But some noteworthy lessons. Remember where your blessings come from. Paul's reminding them of that throughout this chapter. The Lord gave to us, so give back to Him. Go back to the very first verse. The grace of God. Okay, well, He gave to us, so we give back. Also, there's a principle of being generous with our giving. Give what we have. If we have more than others, we'll give more than others. If we don't, if we're lacking, we'll still give, but give as we have. And be generous with what we have. And also trust the Lord to provide. Seek Him first, as we mentioned from this chapter as well. And also, as we've been describing the final verses of this chapter, a great principle is provide things honest. Yes, when it comes to money, provide things honest, but there are other applications of that as well. When there's a potential for accusations to be made against us, provide things honest. Be open. Questions, comments? All right, let's get into chapter 9. We don't have a lot of time, but we'll get maybe just a little bit into this chapter. For as touching the ministering to the saints, it is superfluous for me to write to you. For I know the forwardness of your mind, for which I boast of you to them of Macedonia, that Achaia was ready a year ago, and your zeal hath provoked very many. All right, pause there. Now, that's a big word we don't use a whole lot here in verse 1. As touching the ministering to the saints, of course, it's talking about the same subject, serving, helping the brethren in Judea with your giving. That's this giving. He's still talking about it. He says, it is superfluous for me to write. Now, what does that word mean? Okay. It's the idea of going over and above, in a sense. In other words, I don't need to go over this and over this and over this. It's too much. You already know about these things. Paul had already told them about the poor saints in Jerusalem. He had already told them about the needs. They did not need a long, repeated discourse and explanation about the needs of the brethren in Jerusalem. They already knew this. So Paul's not going to go over all that again, but he is going to remind them of the promise that they made and their responsibility to help. There's that word again we've noted a few times. For I know the forwardness of your mind, your willingness, your desire, your readiness, your great and exceptional interest in being of service. You've expressed that. And it's evident that when Paul first brought this up, they showed a great eagerness to help. Paul's reminding them about that. In fact, concerning their eagerness, and it's evidence that they made a pledge that they're going to help. And it also seems evident that this pledge that they made was very generous, but they haven't followed through with it. But based on their pledge, what had Paul done concerning the brethren of Macedonia? Yeah.
Basically promised that based on their word that to him that
Yeah.
this money is, or this funding is their aid.
For the aid of the brethren in Judea, and also using it to motivate the brethren in Macedonia. Now, earlier in chapter 8, Paul used the Macedonians as a motivation point for the Corinthians. Now he's telling the Corinthians, I used you to motivate the Macedonians. You made a promise. You responded very positively. I used your response to encourage the Macedonians, and they gave from the depths of their poverty. They gave beyond their means. Now you better follow through with what you said you're going to do. Read verse 2 again. For I know the forwardness, that great willingness, that desire of your mind. They had expressed that. And for which I boast of you to them in Macedonia, that Achaia, I see you Corinthians, was ready to, a year ago you expressed this zeal, and I used that to motivate the Macedonians. Okay. And that great zeal provoked their giving, but the Corinthians hadn't fulfilled their pledge yet. That's the problem Paul's addressing. Paul must have considered their promise to be very generous. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought this up. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used it to try to motivate the Macedonians. He must have considered that promise, their pledge, to be generous, so he used it to motivate others, including the Macedonians, to give. He says, your zeal hath provoked very many. That word provoked is interesting. A lot of times we use that in a negative way, to provoke. But here it's used in a good way. Some translations say it stirred them up. It encouraged them, stimulated them, challenged them. In response, the brethren of Macedonia gave beyond their power, gave beyond their means. Now, Corinthians, it's time to follow through. Questions, comments? All right, well, Lord willing, we'll pick up there next time.